Okay, hello everyone. Thank you so much for being here today with us. Thank you for taking the time to register to our event and to join us today. Before we start, just a couple of things. You will be remain muted, and also your video will be off. At the end, we will have the opportunity to unmute yourself in case you have any questions. If you have any, please make sure to type those in the chat, and then we will review it at the end. We will be also recording this session for your reference, where you will be able to find it in our YouTube channel. And also, there's a new thing on Zoom where you can activate your closed captioning. You just have to go to at the bottom of your screen, and then you will see the CC live transcript, and you can just activate that, but that it's on your own on your own screen, on your own account. So if you want to have that captioning available, please make sure to turn that on. Welcome everyone one more time. My name is Yandy Reynoso. I am an advisor for Education USA in Mexico City. And today we are very grateful for having our special guest, which is Pablo Gonzalez. He will be introducing himself in a couple of more minutes. But he currently is a Fulbright Garcia Robles ETA grantee. He will be explaining a little bit more about what he's doing and what he does for Fulbright here in Mexico. This session is for you to become familiar with how to start working on your graduate school personal statement. I know if not all of you are interested in submitting an application for a master's degree or a graduate degree in the US, so this session will be really helpful when you start working on those. Before we give the time to Pablo, I just want to, I just want to little bit talk about what is Education USA and what we do. Some of you might be already familiar with our services, with our advising center. I know some of you might be the first time that you participate and interact with us. Welcome, everyone. What we do, we are a global network of advising centers from the U.S. State Department in collaboration with the U.S. Embassy here in Mexico. What we do is we basically can help you, and we can advise you if you're interested in studying in the U.S. In this case, in studying a graduate degree, a master's degree, or a doctorate degree in the U.S. We can help you from starting researching your options, looking for the different opportunities and institutions available to you. We can help you through the whole admission process, reviewing your essays, and everything that it's on the application. All of our services and all of our activities, because it's a US government program, are free of charge. So whether you are interested, as I said, in pursuing an undergraduate degree or a graduate degree, or even if you're interested maybe in studying an English program in the US, these are the 5 steps for US studies in the US. And our advising process will be taking into consideration these 5 steps. So if you're interested in learning more about these 5 steps, or interested a little bit more about our services, at the end, I will be sharing with you our contact information, so you can write us and follow us in social media, etc. So as I said, today we'll be talking about step 3, which is complete your application. one of the application requirements for grad school is submitting a personal statement, submitting essays. So this session, Pablo will talk a little bit more about that. So now I'll just give the time to Pablo, and thank you so much, Pablo, one more time for being here, and the time is yours.
Perfect. Thank you, Yandi. Thank you, everybody, for being with us today. I did see a message in the chat that said that the slides aren't moving just yet. If we could start at the first slide, Yandi, please.
Okay, sorry about that. Are you guys able to see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, again, thank you everybody for coming and joining this afternoon. My name is Pablo Gonzalez. I am from Dallas, Texas in the United States. And like Yandi mentioned, I am here in Mexico on a grant called the Fulbright Garcia Robles grant, which is a grant given by the United States Department of State that sends researchers and teachers and students from the US to different countries around the world. In this case, I'm here in Mexico as an English teaching assistant. I'm also here in Mexico City. I teach English at the Sinvestav at the campus of the Instituto Politécnico Nacional in Zacatenco. And I have been at Zacatenco and at Sinvestav for the past 9 months for this academic year. Like I said, I'm originally from the United States. I'm from Dallas, Texas. I graduated from Baylor University with a Bachelor's of Arts in Journalism and English degree, and then from Southern Methodist University with a Master's of Education degree in bilingual education. So today we'll be discussing a bit about preparing your personal statements for graduate applications and discussing the nuances and mechanics of what makes a successful personal statement. So we'll go ahead and get started with our discussion for today. And at the end, we'll leave time for questions. Next slide, Andy, please. So we'll start off with what is a personal statement, just kind of discussing what it is and what it's used for. So personal statements, just as an introduction, are a narrative statement. And these statements are used to describe your how you have achieved your current position and how this current position that you have right now relates to your career goals. So when we say a narrative statement, that means that the statement is telling a story. It's not a statement that it's not an essay that you would use necessarily to prove an opinion or convince an admissions committee that you're the best candidate for their school. Whereas you are doing this ultimately in your application, the personal statement is a space for you to tell a story and to create a narrative about yourself and your lived experiences, to tie them into your goals of furthering your education. So if you're interested in studying further another or a master's degree in business or in education or in sciences, your personal statement should be used to discuss how your lived experiences have brought you to this point and how your lived experiences where you are now in your current role are a good fit for you in the long term as you enter graduate study. So the key words here when you talk about a personal statement are narrative, describing, and relating. So the goal of this statement is to really tell a story by describing your lived experiences and then relating them to your ultimate goal of pursuing a graduate degree in your area of study. Next slide, please. So when we talk about a personal statement, there's what we call nuts and bolts, or the requirements that you typically have. Depending on your graduate program, you will be asked to create a personal statement and another statement typically describing your reasons for pursuing the degree or your objectives with that study. With a personal statement, you want to make sure that you are checking your application requirements first. But as I mentioned earlier, it's more of a narrative statement. So when you are working with Education USA and you're identifying the graduate program that you're interested in, it's really important that you check the application requirements of your school, of your program. Typically, they'll ask that you type in Times New Roman font, 12 points with 1-inch margins, single space. However, sometimes the requirements can change depending on your institution. Ultimately, the objective of your personal statement is to set yourself apart and to communicate your goals through graduate study based on your lived experience that you've had up to this point, and also to communicate your life trajectory. So showing through your past experiences where you are now, how you as a person, by setting yourself apart, make yourself a good fit for your next, for this for this particular graduate program or this particular area of study. So it's very important that you take advantage of the space to write, but to really set yourself apart, because the reality is that graduate admissions officers are looking at hundreds, sometimes thousands of statements. So you have to figure out ways, especially as an international student, to set yourself apart. Next slide. So a big piece of the personal statement is creating a personal narrative. And what I say by a personal narrative is by telling the story of yourself. And a key piece to doing this is to start early. So once you've identified your graduate program, once you've identified the area of study that you'd like to pursue, it's important to begin thinking really intentionally about your narrative and how you're going to prepare your application. But you can start by looking at your CV or your resume to begin analyzing trends in your past experiences. So if you have experience in research, if you have experience in teaching, it's important that you start seeing how these past experiences fit with your ultimate goal. And think about, how does graduate study fit into those plans? A lot of times there's people who have amassed all these experiences and they've worked very fulfilling jobs. And sometimes it's not quite evident that they need to go to graduate school to be successful in their career. But if you found that graduate school is the next step for you, you have to be very intentional about how intentional in thinking about how these experiences fit in with each other, and how graduate school is the next step, is the next logical step after what you've had so far. And then further on, give yourself plenty of time to revise and write the drafts, or to write and revise the drafts of your personal statements. The best personal statements that are written are always the ones that are well edited, well revised, and that have had multiple people reading them. So it's always a good idea to reach out to professors, to peers who are proficient in English that can edit them, and also reach out to your advisors at Education USA so that they can also support you as you're preparing and crafting your personal statement. Next slide. So as we talked about creating your narrative and figuring out how the past experiences work together to get you to the next phase of your educational career, it's important to think about what makes you unique. What are the pieces in your life and your lived experiences that set you apart from other people? Especially as international students, you will be bringing in a wealth of experience that's typically overlooked or not present in American institutions. So just this alone and your lived experiences in Mexico already give you a unique experience that is often not displayed in American institutions. So thinking about what makes you unique, what sets you apart, will automatically help you in developing your personal narrative in a way that's very different than that of a lot of people in the US who are applying to these programs. Also consider what made you interested in this field of study. What about STEM? What about business? What about engineering really piques your interest? Why studying this particular field at this certain institution is of interest to you? And what have you learned from this field of study through your internships, your activities, or other engagement? Maybe you had a servicio social that was really important, that was really meaningful to you in Mexico, and you want to continue working in this area, and you want to study in the US so that you can get another perspective on this particular area of work. All of these things are really important to incorporate into your personal statement so that you can develop your personal narrative. And then finally, think about what are some experiences in the past that have led you to this moment of furthering your education? Why is it important now, or why are you choosing now to try to study in the United States? Why is it important that you're going now instead of 3 years from now or 5 years from now? What about where you are in your particular career trajectory, in your academic experience, is important that you go to graduate school now. So these are all different things that are really important to consider as you're creating your narrative, as you're developing this personal story that you'll begin to show in your personal statement. Next slide. All right, so now we're going to do a little bit of an exercise in helping you to build your narrative. So what I want us to do is, where you are, if you have a pen and a paper close by, I want you to think about these areas here on the screen. So we have academic engagement, professional experience, campus or community service or involvement, your hobbies, your interests, your demographics, your identity, your lived experiences, and to begin to think about little different items in each category. So for instance, if you are involved in an honor society at your university, what I'd like for you to do is to create a list of different ways that you've been involved in these different areas so that you can start to develop your personal narrative. So for example, if you look at academic engagement, under this area, think about ways that you've been involved academically at your school. So if you've been in an honor society, if you have done research, if you have worked with, as assisted a professor, think about these and make a list of these opportunities. If you've already worked in the past, if you have experience in a professional setting, if you've already had a professional job, maybe write down a list of these experiences that you've already had. Next would be campus or community service engagement. If you have been involved in your school community in a certain way through different organizations, through clubs, through professional affiliations, make a list of those there. Next, let's make a list of your hobbies and interests. What are some areas, what are some interests, or what are some interests outside of school that you have? It might be running, it might be exercise, it might be reading, it might be cooking, whatever you like to do in your free time, make a list of those. And then finally, make a list of your demographics, your identity, or your lived experiences. Maybe your family comes from an underrepresented background in Mexico. Maybe you've had a really cool experience abroad that you have had before this, and you want to share this in your personal statement. So take the next maybe 2 to 3 minutes to consider and make a list of these items. Let's say 2 minutes, and we're going to go on to the next slide. But I'd like us to take 2 minutes right now and make a list of these past experiences that you've had so that you can take them and begin thinking about how to craft your personal statement as you get ready to prepare it. So I'm going to mute my microphone, but take the next 2 minutes to create this list. Okay. And I'll be also monitoring the chat as well. Rafael has a really good question. So what do you mean about campus or community service? So if you're involved at all on your campus, or if you were involved when you were an undergraduate student, whether that be through a club, if you did any kind of community service, if you volunteered at all at your school or in your community, those would be things that you did as community service or campus involvement. If you were in a student association, anything like that, yes. About a minute more. Okay. So it doesn't have to be, so that's just about time. And it doesn't have to be an exhaustive list. Let's see. Yes, like Julio said, social service, if you've done anything like that, that you can also include that. Yes, academic engagement, like Maite says, or like as Maite is asking, would be any kind of academic work that you've done at school. So if you've published any research, if you have worked with any professors, if you've researched with professors, if you have, or if you're a part of an honorary society, if you have really high grades at your school and that's given you special recognition, anything like that would be academic engagement. So this doesn't have to be a complete list, but if we go now to the next slide, Yandi, I'd like for us to consider with what you've put on your list, which of these items, which of these experiences, which of these past opportunities or interests that you've had is really important to you, and you feel like you could create a personal statement or a story about yourself using this experience. So if you had a social service, like Julio said, that was really meaningful, and you can share about how that social service has motivated you to continue studying, to return, to go to the United States, then that would be an excellent topic to include or a theme to use as your personal statement. So all of these lists that we just created were a brainstorm that you can use as an idea to build your personal statement off of. Remember that a personal statement is on building a narrative. So when you've identified this experience or something that's been really meaningful for you, it's easier to build a narrative around that topic or that idea because you created a connection to it. Now, what's important is that you show the reader why this is important to you and why it was really meaningful and how this experience sets you apart from other people. So as we continue on in this presentation, and after this presentation, I would encourage you to keep reflecting and thinking about what are the things that are really important to you, the interests, your professional experience, your academic work that are important enough for you that you can create a personal statement around and that you can tell your story through that experience. Next slide, please. Okay, so as you write your personal statement, after you've identified that topic that you want to write on, that experience that was really important to you, consider who were you when that happened to you? What do you need to know for the story to make sense? As the reader, as someone who's reviewing your application, if you're discussing this research opportunity that you had, what are some other facts that you need to include from this opportunity that helps me as a reader understand what you're saying? What happened to set the story in motion? What about this opportunity or this experience that you're writing about changes the course of the narrative, or in other words, changes the course of your story? How have you as a person changed because of this experience to now? What has happened in your life since that experience that you're discussing that's brought you to this place now? The next is, why is this important? Why did you win, or why did you have to win, or why did you have to lose? How did your actions from this experience in this narrative affect others? What did you do as a result, or what happened as a result of the results of this experience that you had, or this servicio social that you had that was really important, or this community volunteering that you did? And then at the end, how are you different now than you were at the beginning of the story when you began to tell it? What's really important in these narratives is that you show a character arc, and that shows how your personality, how your character, how your perspectives have changed since and throughout the narrative and throughout the story that you're trying to communicate. Next, please, Yandi. Okay, so now to discuss what are some characteristics of a successful personal statement. So starting off, you want to have an effective hook. So when you think of a hook, you think of like a fishing hook that pulls in a fish that you're fishing, or something that draws you in. An effective personal statement, a successful personal statement, always starts off with a hook. So you want to start off the story or start off your narrative or your personal statement with a strong narrative that sets the reader in the setting where you are telling your story from. So you want to draw your reader in from the very beginning so that you keep their attention. And what's important is that after you hook your reader in, you have to maintain their attention throughout the entire personal statement. So with this being said, it's very important that you use very concise and effective language. This is where having people read your personal statements and revising your personal statements is very critical, because after you draw your reader in, you want to keep their attention throughout the story. And if you're using very passive voice, if you're using run-on sentences, it becomes very dry. And though you may have an effective hook at the beginning of your personal statement, you might not keep the reader's attention throughout their entire time reading your statement. So it's important that you keep very concise and effective language, avoid that passive voice, and reach out to people. If you have doubts about how to avoid passive voice, how to use effective language, be sure to reach out to your Education USA advisors or to other people that you trust that can give you some guidance on this, so that you're giving the best version of yourself and presenting the best version of your writing in this statement. Next is that a personal statement that's successful shows the thread of the lived events that make a case for you. So as I said earlier, your personal statement is telling a story, and it's very important that the story shows how this experience connects to your ultimate goal of going to graduate school. And by connecting your past experiences to this goal, this is making the case for why you would be a great candidate for study at this particular institution. And that sets you apart from other applicants. And then finally, your effective personal statement communicates why, based on your past lived experiences, you should be selected for the program. Why you would be the best candidate based on your past experience that you've connected to the idea that you've identified that makes you the best candidate for this program. So all of these are very good characteristics of successful personal statements. And always remember that you have people around you that can support you in revising, but the biggest key is that you give yourself plenty of time to read and revise. Julio says, I think it is long narrative so much, it should have a lot of details. Yes, it is a long narrative statement. Remember that depending on your institution, they will decide how long, or they will tell you how long your statement should be. Typically it's 1 page. In some cases it can be 2 and 3 pages, but it is a long narrative. It's a long story. So you do have plenty of space to be able to write and to be able to to share the important details about yourself. Yes. Next slide, please, Yanvi. Okay, so now we're going to look at a successful personal statement as an example. So I'd like for you to take the next maybe 30 seconds to a minute to read this personal statement beginning, and we'll be able to discuss what are some characteristics that make it very successful. So take the next 30 seconds to about a minute to read these first 2 paragraphs, and we'll discuss them. Okay. Okay. So about 30 seconds to a minute. And after reading the beginning part of this personal statement, you can see that the writer is very explicit in showing and taking us to the scene where they're writing from. So the writer is discussing being on the floor of the library lounge in France. They are talking about a specific poem. They give us a very visual opening. They take us directly there to where they're writing from, and to a place not only where they're writing from, but to a place that's relevant to their goal of further study. So it's one thing to discuss, I'm in a library, I'm in a really good book that's very interesting to me, versus saying, I am in a library in France reading these specific anthologies of poetry because I am very interested in French poetry. So when you see how visual the opening is, it takes the reader there, but then not only being visual, but being explicit into where, being explicit into the exact location and how this location is relevant to the rest of the statement. Also, it shows the reader, it takes the reader through the intellectual development. So it shows how the writer is in the library, encountering these books of poetry, and then begins to show how from this experience in the library, they return to their university, and it shows this kind of development of their interest in this genre of poetry. And then also it's important to note that they are giving very specific examples of theorists, of authors, of names. It's one thing to say, oh, I'm very interested in 17th century French poetry. But it's another thing to say, I'm very interested in 17th century French poetry by these specific authors, by these specific literary critics, and these specific theorists who have spoken and who have done research and who have written on this particular this genre that I'm also interested in as well. So a very good personal statement has that visual opening, has the hook. Also take note that it has very concise language. It's very straight and to the point. And then it's also being very specific in naming the authors, theorists, and other names of scholars that they've come across that have piqued their interest in their area of study. Next slide, please. So as you consider your personal statement, begin to think, how did my opening paragraph capture your attention? Was my statement interesting? Was there any information that was irrelevant? And these are all things that can come up as you're revising and as you're reading them over again, or as you have someone else read your statements. But think also is, how does the statement set me apart from other applicants? What are the things that I'm writing about in the statement, doing and saying about myself that set me apart from others? And then is it evident at the very end that I make my case that to attend graduate school and why graduate school is the logical next step? In case that wasn't clear, at the very end of your statement, you want to make sure that it's very evident that graduate school and this particular program at this particular institution is your logical next step. And you make a case for why based on your lived experiences and what you're communicating in your personal statement. Next slide, please. So the personal statement is very long. It's a longer form narrative piece of writing, but it's important to know that as you're writing this essay for consideration for graduate admissions, that you're not alone. It can seem very daunting. It can also seem very nebulous, right? Like it can seem that it's very ethereal. You have to get these ideas onto paper and you have to make them all connect, but know that you're not alone. There are definitely a lot of resources. Here are a list of resources that are available to you as you prepare your personal statements and as you look for guidance, as you revise them and edit them. Also take into account that your Education USA advisor is an excellent resource that can be of use as you're preparing your statements and as you're getting ready to send your applications off. Definitely keep the communication with them so that they can give you some tips and some tricks on how to write an effective statement. It's also very good to note that your Education USA advisor has experience with helping other people prepare their application so they know what a successful application and what a successful personal statement looks like. So these are some resources that you have. I hope this has been helpful. Now I think we're going to move into the next portion of our program, which is answering questions. So we can move on to the next slide, Yanti.
Great. Thank you, Pablo. Are there any questions, guys, that you would like to ask to Pablo? Sure. You can unmute yourself.
Thank you a lot. Thank you Thank you for this presentation. Really helpful. I never written nor, well, I have started some research on how to do a personal statement, but of course, having all this information is very helpful. And I would like to ask you, well, this could be for both Pablo and for Education USA. If we apply to multiple colleges, multiple universities here for a graduate program, do you recommend us to write different personal statements for each one of them, or like make a general template of the main narrative and make some modifications and adjustments to fit the college or the programming in case they are slightly different?
Sure. Yeah, I think what we do, and this is something that usually our advicees do, and this is what we recommend, is just what you said. You can start to having a general essay that covers everything, and then you can use the same one to send it to the different universities. Also, make sure that you know each of the programs that you are applying, because you will need to probably modify a few things regarding the program in the institution that you are applying. But yeah, you can have one, just as you said, as a general, and then on that you can start working each of the different versions that you will be submitting to the different universities. I don't know if Pablo, if you have any suggestions on that or
Yes,
comments. Mhm.
yes, definitely. I would just add that that's a very common practice, especially in preparing personal statements. Oftentimes you'll find that there's multiple programs, multiple universities that you're interested in. And instead of creating, multiple drafts, creating different essays, it's very common to adjust them and make them fit the need of your school. Just make sure that before you submit anything, that it doesn't have to a name of another institution mentioned before you submit. And just make sure that you're being very specific or very explicit in meeting the requirements of your institution. Sometimes they might be different in terms of the font size, or if they want single space or double space. It's totally fine to create kind of a template, like you said, and then adjust it to different schools as you apply to different programs. It's just make sure to be mindful of that you're following the requirements of each school and you're not mentioning other universities in your submitted materials.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, Jacqueline is asking if we can share the links. Yeah, we will share the links with you tomorrow, as and also for those of you who join a little bit late, I will be sharing with you the recording and the links for these resources that Pablo mentioned, and a few other resources that our Education USA Advising Center has for you. And then there's another one question on the chat. I have a particular question related to outstand from other applicants in this essay. Let's say that there are two applicants from the same school and the same program, but they wanted to pursue different master's degree program. They also have recently graduated, and one of them was valedictorian for their class. Will the valedictorian outstand from his ex-classmate stating his honorific mention in his personal statement essay, even though they are applying to different areas? Okay, that's a very interesting question. I don't know if you want to start, Pablo, and then I can just follow up.
Yes, that's a good question. I would say, Armand, that it's important to know that when you're applying to graduate school, it's very different than applying to an undergraduate institution. So usually with graduate applications and in graduate admissions, they take what's called a holistic approach to your review. So what that means is that they're not just considering your grades, your recommendation letters, or your personal statement as one over the other as more important for admission. They take everything into consideration. So they take into consideration your resume, your past experience, your grades. They look at the trends in your grades. They look at how you have participated at your university. So you could say that maybe that if a person has a higher GPA or they're valedictorian going into another program, it might be helpful, but it might not always necessarily be the best. There wouldn't be automatic acceptance because there's other things that they take into consideration beyond grades. And that's why these personal statements are so important, because for people that might not have had the best grades as an undergraduate student, the personal statement can be another supplement to your application that shows different parts of yourself that aren't evident in your grades. So that's why it's really important to put the time and prepare in preparing these statements, because they take such a holistic approach in reviewing your materials.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Pablo. And just to add on that, remember that the essays, it's only one more requirement. It's not the only thing that they will take into consideration, of course. But I always like to see it as is your only opportunity to raise your voice, as cheesy as it sounds, but is the only opportunity. If we go back and if we review a little bit more about the requirements that grad school asks, they will require you essays. You write those essays. They will require letters of recommendation. You don't write those letters of recommendation. They will require your transcript. Those are just numbers. They will require a TOEFL score, another number. They will require a standardized admissions test, either GRE or GMAT. That's another number. So the essays is your opportunity to mention something about that it hasn't been mentioned in your application. And also, I like to see the personal statement as if it was your autobiography. So you talk about yourself, you talk about things that you have accomplished, and all these important things that Pablo has shared with us. So yeah, I mean, just as he said, they will take into consideration everything, not only the essays or your scores or your experience. I mean, everything counts. So just something really important of the application will be your essays, and as he said, the more time you have, the better to prepare. You want to have people to review them, Education USA advisors, if you have a professor that you're working on, or if you want a friend just to read it, that will be also helpful to have someone to review it, and also take the time to write those. Don't expect to write your essays from one day to another. A few other questions. If those experiences were many years ago, can we still include them? What do you think, Pablo?
I think OCDs, if they're still relevant, include them. But if they don't have anything to do with with your goal now, then don't include them. Remember that you only have a limit of space, so make sure that what you're including gives you the most advantage in consideration.
Exactly. And that goes along with the next question. Somebody's asking, are high school experiences still relevant for grad school applications? I wouldn't recommend that. I mean, just focus on what you have accomplished most recently. For example, your undergraduate degree, or if you are applying to a doctorate degree, where talk also about your undergraduate, but your master's degree. So yeah, I would recommend you to don't include high school experiences, and also don't include, for example, recommenders from high school. So yeah. Mhm. I see a couple of hands raised. So Maite, you are welcome to unmute yourself.
Okay, hi, it's nice to meet you for all. I have a question. If we like students who have gone through several difficult experiences of challenges that make us grow, how more or less are like good or required to put in the personal statement, or how many information is recommended?
Ahí na grado. Ah, yeah.
Great. Thank you, Maite, for your question. Do you want to start, Pablo?
Yes, I think that's a really good question, Mike. There, I think it's good. I think it would be good to include the experiences that most change you and that have been the most formative. Don't feel like you have to sell your trauma or to sell a certain experience or something that might have been very difficult for you to get into a graduate program. Feel free to use those experiences, but if only if there are experiences that have caused you to grow and that have caused you to learn very meaningful lessons that are relevant to your furthering your study. So whereas it's good to include them, don't feel pressured to include all of them. You should really only be focusing on the ones that have caused you to learn the most, that have caused you the most growth, and have helped you to get to where you are now and that are pushing you to continue to follow your goals. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Maite. Jacqueline?
Hi, so in science, it happens a lot that personal statements mention like, oh, I am interested in this because my grandma died of cancer, or because I have this person that is very close to me that had Alzheimer's or something like that. But I wanted to ask, like, in my case, fortunately, I'm interested in science just because I have a passion for it, and it sounds really interesting and it's very insightful. But I don't know if I'm explaining myself. I would just like some advice on how to build a case for yourself against statements that have such a strong emotional background.
Sure. Yeah. Something that I always advise my students when starting writing their personal statement is, as Pablo mentioned on his presentation. He mentioned about effective hook. So I always like to read essays when they start the first paragraph, when they start telling me a story, because that's a perfect hook. Like I'm interested in learning a little bit more about that. I'm curious to know more about that. So I think first thing I will recommend you to maybe tell us a story. I mean, if you are interested in studying science, maybe start telling me the story why, briefly, because it's your introduction. But tell me the story why you became interested, what happened, what did you do that you or what happened in your life, in your trayectoria that made you interested in studying this area of study. So I think this is just one of the types of essays that grad school will require you. As I said, Pablo just covered the things that you should take into consideration when writing this. I mentioned to see this as an autobiography. There will be a few other essays where you will have the chance, to talk and to speak specifically about your study objectives. For example, another kind of essay is it's that one right there, your study objectives, where you only focus on your study objectives, or what you want to study. And I want to study in the US because I don't know, this program, this línea de investigación. I want to do research on this. I want to research on that. So I think, I mean, it's válido, to talk about that on your essay. I don't know, Pablo, if you have anything else you want to add.
Yeah, I agree. I think with everything, I agree with everything that Yandi said. I think I would just also reiterate that it's important that you keep the study objectives and the personal statements separate, because they're two different types of writings. Personal statements are a lot more technical, or I'm sorry, the study objectives is a lot more technical versus the personal statement. You can be a lot, this is where you show off all of your flowery language and your narrative voice and your personal voice. This is your opportunity to share more about yourself and show your personality versus your study goals and your objectives.
Thank you. Rafael.
I thank you. I just have another question. It would be regarding more or less if you would recommend to explain something on a personal statement. For example, in my case, my career, my bachelor's degree, or the degree I gained suffers sometimes of having very few opportunities, both in academic and on the industry, because it's still a relatively new career, at least in this country, in Mexico, and also because unless you're specialized, it's hard for you to get outside to do more things regarding especially science or research and development, right? So I don't know if how good if it would look good or if it would look bad to also mention that the reason why one wants to study a master's or a postgraduate program is to specialize and like escape from that cage that sometimes specific careers suffer, especially those like new careers or more and generic careers suffer when trying to apply to more technical jobs or to more technical, maybe even to some internships, etc. I don't know if that would be something like that looks good, or if it would look bad, like if I would be blaming the industry. I don't know how would that look on an essay.
Sure. Yeah. I think in this case, for the United States, if you will be submitting an application to the US, the first thing that I will recommend you try to tie this to the opportunities that you will get in the US. And also it is very valid also to talk in your personal statement. We mentioned talk about your experiences that you had, but it is also valid to talk about the lack of experience that you had, the lack of opportunities that you've had. And as I said, try to tie it well. I haven't had the opportunity because the lack of experience is here in Mexico, but in the US, I'm applying to the US because the great opportunities that I can find there, as I said, I don't know, the research opportunities that I'm gonna have there. So I think it's valid, as I said, to also mention about the lack of opportunities. But as Pablo mentioned earlier, do that, but also but on the right side, I mean, after something maybe negative or not so positive, we'll try to give it a positive side. So Pablo.
Gandhi, if I could just add, that's a good comment or good observation to make, because a lot of graduate applications will give you what's called it's called a addendum or a diversity statement. And those are additional statements or additional space in the application to discuss exactly what you're describing. If you did not have a particular opportunity in Mexico, but the US has this opportunity here, or this degree would give you a certain advantage because of a disadvantage you have in your home country, or you had a particular circumstance that was difficult and you need to explain because of this disadvantage you had, you're looking to come to the United States. Or if you had adverse undergraduate performance and you need to discuss that, you have those spaces in your application to bring up those matters, or you can bring them up in your personal statement if it's relevant to your trajectory, as Yandy said.
Thank you a lot, both of you. Very helpful, that comment.
Thank you, Rafael, and thank you everyone for your questions. This was great. It was great to hear from you. And before we let you go and we finished, I don't see any other questions. So I just want to invite you to please follow our social media accounts. You can find us in Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, etc. I will also suggest you to follow and visit our Education USA official website. Tomorrow, as I said, I will be following up with you with the recording and also the resources. We do have resources and some handouts where you can find a little bit more information about what just Pablo mentioned on the personal statement, some recommendations, and not only for the personal statement, but also for your CV, for your curriculum, which will be another requirement for you to submit, and also study objectives, etc. So I will be following up with you to share those resources. I do want to add that our advising center, it's located at the Benjamin Franklin Library, which is the U.S. Embassy's library. It's located, as you see on screen, at Calle Liverpool in La Colonia Juárez. The library just recently opened again. You are welcome to visit the library, but you need to schedule an appointment in order for you to enter the library. You are only able to visit the library if you're interested in getting materials, in getting resources such as books, guides, etc. And guess what? We do have many books, many resources for you to check out if you are interested in learning a little bit more about these essays for grad school. We have many books that actually show us different essays that have worked, essays that have been able to succeed in undergraduate application, sorry, graduate applications. So tomorrow in the email, I will also share with you the instructions if you are interested in visiting the library and to check out some of these books and the resources that we have. As I said, you need to schedule an appointment. You need to have a credential to check out these resources. If you don't have one, it's free. You can get one here. So you are welcome to come visit the library for a specific reason. That will be to check out the different materials. The library usually has in-person activities, but right now it's not open for that. It's only open for to check out materials. Also, our advising services are not open to the public yet. We are only advising online through our emails, through Zoom, etc. So if you want to come to the library, as I said, come by an appointment, and you will be also you can only be here for a couple of minutes just to check out your materials, and that's it. So yeah, thank you so much, Pablo, for taking the time to meet with us and for sharing all this information. It was really helpful. I hope everyone enjoyed it as much as I did. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add before we go.
No, that's it. Thank you everybody for coming, and thank you for having me this afternoon, Yandi. It was a great session.
Thank you, Pablo, and thank you, everyone. Please follow us on social media so you can learn a little bit more about our future activities. And I will follow up with you tomorrow with these resources and information about the library. Thank you so much. Have a good night. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.